Okay, it looks like everybody's in. I've hit the record button. Thank you everybody for joining. We have a pretty jam-packed webinar full of information on our second round of the BEAD Grant Program. The grant program application window did open on Monday, January 27th, and guidelines were made available a couple weeks prior to that. So hopefully you've had some time to review guidelines and have brought us questions. But you will have time to ask questions as we go throughout the webinar. We do have 3 sections. We'll cover the round 2 addendum. We'll cover the portal, and we'll cover the updated BEAD eligibility map. So you'll have time to hear updates on that, and then we'll take questions, like I said, as we go. I am going to ask that you hold questions until the end of each section. So, for example, we'll do round 2 addendum first, and then at the end of that section, we'll take questions either in the chat or raise your hand. So Megan, if you want to go ahead and go to the first slide, I'll kick us off here. I already kind of covered what we're gonna talk about. So Megan, you can go to the next one. Before we start, just a couple of disclaimers we want you to be aware of. First of all, our program, the parameters are subject to the NTIA's BEAD NOFO, so that our BEAD grant program is developed using the BEAD NOFO, as well as other federal and state requirements. In the event of a discrepancy between the information that we present here and the NOFO, the NOFO and the federal state requirements will be the source of truth. And we'll clarify any questions or anything that comes up in regard to that. Information presented on these slides does not constitute legal advice, and grantees are encouraged to consult their own legal counsel. You can visit the NTIA's BEAD website for additional information. And then we want to make sure you know the CBO does have the right to amend any advanced BEAD program guidelines and supporting application materials at any time. So we will provide the slides and the recording of this call afterwards. So any links to information will be provided after the call. So I think we're good. Megan, if you want to go to the next slide, I'm going to hand it to Helen, who is with our vendor partner, KPMG, and she's going to cover the round 2 addendum. So go ahead, Helen.
Thank you, Lauren. Hi, everybody. Great for us to be here with you today. We're just going to give you the highlights from the round 2 addendum. Obviously, more details can be found on the CBO BEAD website, but we'll just kick it off, first of all, with some logistics on the next slide. So as Lauren said, the application window for round 2 was opened on Monday, January 27th, and this will remain open until Friday, February 28th till 11:59 p.m. Mountain Time. In terms of webinars, so in addition to the webinar that's being held today, you can still revert to the original webinar that we recorded for round 1. This will give you additional information on using the portal and just information about the required information to be submitted and a general advice of that nature. You can find this on the CBO website. It's still there for your reference. Office hours are going to be held every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, and you can register for those throughout the application window. There's a link here for you to do that. And similarly, an FAQ for round 2 has been set up. This will be continually updated based on questions that come out of this webinar, office hours, etc. And again, there's a link in this document that will get you there. Similar as Lauren mentioned before, if there's any sort of confusion around round 1, round 2, or order of precedence for interpretation, number 1 is always the NTIA BEAD NOFO and NTIA guidance. This also includes the NTIA alternative broadband technology policy. Then we would move to the CBO round 2 addendum and CBO BEAD grant guidelines. Okay, so we'll move on to some of the main changes in round 2. So in round 2, the $20 million project size cap for each individual project that was included in round 1 has been removed. So individual single applications do not have to be limited to $20 million in round 2. The low-cost service option has increased. So it's increased to $50 or less a month on non-tribal lands, and it's increased to $75 or less per month for tribal lands. And this is inclusive of all charges and adjusted annually. Applicants can still request a waiver, and this will be a waiver of the $50 rate, but this is now not to exceed $75. And again, similar to round one, this is at the sole discretion of CBO to grant. Match waivers. So as with round one, match waivers are still available for round two if an applicant is not intending on submitting at least 25% match, they must submit a match waiver. But just to note that providing the required match still makes your application more competitive than if you don't. Okay, next slide. In round two, the application is no longer a binding agreement. The final grant agreement, that is where the binding agreement takes place. However, the information from your applications is what CBO is going to be using for the NTA proposal. So we're still looking for this to be as accurate as we can. And also a bin bond is not going to be required in round two. In terms of new applications and new applicants, so obviously all applicants are open to be applying in round two, even if you have not applied in round one. In terms of new applications, so even if you have submitted an application in round one and you want to apply again, the round two application must be submitted as a new and complete application. You can, however, copy and paste the applicant related information into your round two application. But note that all of obviously your project financials, your project design, project information, everything will need to be updated. And just to note, if you did receive curing requests in the first round of applications, for example, maybe you were missing something in the workforce plan, please make sure that all these improvements are included in your round two application. The last one, Megan, I think. Okay. And of course, obviously, we're looking to reduce the cost of applications in order to increase the BEAD outlay effectiveness. And just to provide a few hints on that, applicants can consider removing high-cost BSLs. You could increase the match above the 25%. And of course, the use of alternative technologies for remaining BSLs. A big change that Megan is going to talk through is that 100% of BSL coverage is not required for round two. So Megan is going to talk through how applicants can select and apply for BSLs in their applications and project areas later on in this session. And just a last note on alternative technology. So alternative technology providers are welcome to apply in round two. CBO is going to follow NTIA guidance, so please do check the NTIA guidance on alternative technology as well as CBO's addendum to the BEAD Grant guidelines. And I think that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Helen. So we can stop and take questions on anything that Helen covered at this time before we move on to the map. And you can raise your hand and ask the question, or you can drop it in the chat and I can read it for the group. Okay, why don't we go ahead and move on to Megan?
All right, thank you. Good morning, everyone. So I'll be talking through the round two data and the mapping tool. So we did something a little different with the round two data. On this slide, I have a link for where you can download the CSV. And I want to point out that we're still joining this to the version 3.2 of the FCC fabric, because that's the version that we use for our eligible location list that's on record with NTIA. So what we did for round two is we put locations from that eligible location list into three categories. The first is not available, and that consists of essentially all the locations that have either been preliminarily awarded in round one, or they have a confirmed enforceable commitment for federal or state funding, or they've been taken off of the FCC fabric since we published, our version 3.2 list. So that's what consists of the not available category. And those are just locations we won't be taking bids on for round two. Everything else falls into eligible unserved or eligible underserved. And those have the same classifications as you saw in round one. It's just a subset of what's available this round. Additionally, those eligible locations have a bunch of flags on them. So we wanted to incorporate all of these flags into one data set so that it's easier for you all to review the data and see what the potential considerations are for certain locations. So a location may have multiple flags. Something to keep in mind. So it could be a high cost BSL and have reliable service reported, for example. And I'll show you in a minute, like we have detailed descriptions of what each of these categories are, but under negotiation essentially means that we are in the midst of negotiating a round one application. It's still available for new applications since it's on this eligible list. Pending enforceable commitments, those are federal or state commitments that have not been finalized yet. Currently, it's a couple of USDA grants that are still in that category. So, you know, the minute we get word that those are finalized, we won't be funding those. And then we flagged a number of high cost BSLs, basically the top 30% of the most expensive locations remaining. And then reliable service reported basically means that in the FCC map, the current FCC National Broadband Map, there is reliable service reported that meets the BEAD standard for, you know, reliable service. So that's just a flag that, like, if we get confirmation that those locations are served, we have the option to take those off the map and not fund them. And then as far as non-serviceable locations, this is an attempt to identify those locations that are just, you know, rocks or hay bales or abandoned buildings. Maybe it's a enterprise location that does not need mass market broadband. So that's what's contained in that flag. And I encourage you to review those locations and determine if they are, you know, legitimate locations that still do need mass market broadband. All right. So I'll go through the mapping tool in a minute here. I'm going to do a short demo. Hopefully you can refer back to the recording from our previous webinar that has some more details about how to navigate the map. But what we've tried to do for round two is really simplify the layers and simplify the map. And then you'll be able to get an export, a CSV export of the locations you need to upload to your application. And that's where we come to the main difference between round one and round two, is that your application will be defined by the locations instead of project areas. So, and we have a screenshot of this later on. When you get to that project area selection, we've removed that option. So you won't be selecting project areas anymore. You'll be uploading a CSV of the locations that you want to serve as part of your application. And then, as I mentioned, we incorporated all those flags directly into the data set so that you have it all on hand when you download the data. All right, so I'm going to just do a quick run through. So if you participated in round one, this should look familiar. we really just changed the text and updated the map. We have new instructions for how to use the updated map, so make sure to check out the instructions slide deck. And then we have a location upload template linked here, so make sure to download that so that you know exactly what format you'll need to upload the data into the application portal. And again, here's the detailed description of all of the flags and categories that we have in the round 2 data. Okay, and now I'm opening the mapping tool. So when you open this, you'll notice it looks very similar as it did before. In order to see the locations, you'll need to zoom in a couple notches, and all of that will show up. Hopefully y'all remember how to get to the layers and the legend. We do have a layer of the not available locations, and that's just, to show, what was in round 1 that has been taken off. So if we zoom in here, make sure to look at the legend. If it's eligible, either unserved or underserved, it's showing up as green. And then everything with a flag will show up, with a different symbol based on this order of flags. And like I mentioned, there could be locations with multiple flags. So if it's non-serviceable and high cost, it's going to have the first one on the list rather than lower on the list as its symbol, but it still does have both of those flags. Similar to before, you can, I'll zoom to the southern part because I just saw that in the chat. So similar to before, you can use this selection tool, and you can decide if you want a rectangle, circle. So when you go in here, you can just, select the area that you want to serve. This table down at the bottom will have an export, or we'll have a table that you can export, and you can get to that export by clicking Actions, Export, and then choose that CSV. And that will have the format that you need to match the template. And once you get to the template part, you'll need to fill in your proposed technology and download and upload speed. So once you get that download, make sure to fill those in before you submit your application.
Megan.
Yes.
You're at a stopping point. A few questions have come through the chat. I don't know if you want to stop now to answer them, since they're probably about what you just covered, or do you want to finish?
Sure, I'll just finish up. I think this is the last thing I wanted to mention on the demo. These cards over here on the left will show what you have selected, and how many of them have flags, how many are unserved versus underserved. So yes, I can jump into a couple questions now.
Okay. And I can read them for the group, but they are in the chat. One question is, when will the locations marked as reliable service reported be resolved?
Oops. So those are sort of, they have the potential to be resolved, but they also, since it's FCC reporting, we do need to verify that those have service. We'll be doing some outreach in the coming weeks to providers who are in that category. So that we can get that evidence that they are actually served. So the when is not something I can really answer. I think that's going to be an ongoing process as we work with those companies and try to get the evidence so that we can, it's our responsibility to tell NTIA whether it's served or not if we decide that we're not going to fund it. So, all right.
All right, thanks, Megan. And if you have a follow-up to your question in the chat that we read and we're talking about, feel free to come off mute and ask a follow-up question. But if that's resolved, we can move on to the next one. I'm going to read Paul's question. He said, I don't understand why locations are eligible if they have reported reliable broadband service. Can you give us an example of when the CBO would fund a BEAD subsidy for a BSL that has a fiber cable or licensed wireless flag?
Right, so that's it's similar to the last question, but essentially just because it's reported to the FCC, that doesn't mean that we can guarantee there's service there. And that's kind of the whole, the background of having to do a challenge process is to ensure that that data reflects reality. So if there's reported fiber, we need to get proof of that before we can say that we're not going to fund it. And wireless and cable as well. So it's really just they're still eligible because we don't have that assurance at this time.
There's like 30, sorry, this is Paul. I count like 33,000 BSLs with that flag.
Mm-hmm.
That's so you'll have to go through those all and challenge them.
So as an applicant, you don't need to do that work, but it's, you know your area, so you probably know if there's reported wireless service, maybe the neighborhood that you are proposing to serve can't even get that service and it's misreported. So the flag is just there to ensure that you are aware that that data is out there. If I think fiber and cable might be a little more straightforward because if there's infrastructure in the ground, typically. So you would know like another provider is providing service here. And then that might be something that we're able to confirm down the line.
But if you do confirm there's service, then it's not eligible for BEAD, correct?
There's a little wiggle room from NTA on that piece, but at the CBO, we're committed to not overbuilding, and we want to make good use of taxpayer dollars in this program. So, if there's solid evidence that the service does exist, we are likely to not award BEAD funds in those locations.
Got it. Thank you.
And Megan, just as far as presenting evidence, is there any process that'll be followed for providers to inbound into the CBO to present evidence instead of relying on you guys to inbound into us?
Yeah, so we're going to do some outreach in a couple weeks here, maybe as soon as next week, to start getting the process going of collecting that evidence. But essentially, we'll be reaching out to you to say, the data indicates that you have service here. Can you provide evidence If not, we won't be able to take it off the map. If you provide sufficient evidence that the CBO is confident that the locations are served, that's when we would be able to essentially, I don't want to say recategorize those locations, but it's essentially like put that in the bucket of not likely to fund.
Got
Okay.
it. So it's really mostly just inbound into the providers as opposed to the providers going through a portal that the CBO posts to then present evidence on specific BSLs like that. There won't be any process to facilitate that.
No, I think we'll be doing this over email primarily, but we can provide some options for like secure uploads and those kinds of things.
Thank you.
Hey, Megan, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
This is David Shipley. Just to follow up on Ben's question. So in the event that a company can see that there's maybe some overbuild or some areas or locations that are served, can we reach out to CBO to just notify staff of the potential conflict?
Yes. Yeah, if there's stuff that you are aware of and have information to share, we're happy to accept that information. And then once we get further into the process, we will determine what other information we need.
Thank you, Megan.
Okay, there's a question on how were high cost BSLs determined. We used the CostQuest cost model, and basically we're highlighting the top 30% of locations based on that cost model. The top 30% of the remaining available locations. So it's a pretty big chunk. Some of them might be right next to a location that's not marked high cost. But yeah, it's basically just the top 30% based on the cost model.
In addition to that, though, too, Megan, that's correct. We also added multipliers to the CostQuest data as well, because the CostQuest data is pretty low for Colorado.
Mm-hmm.
Kate's question was answered, so we can skip past that to Doug's. Why would BSLs be eligible if reliable service reported is true? Will the CBO be able to choice between an application request to serve the BSL and reported service?
Okay, and that kind of comes down to the previous answer, is we're still working on collecting that evidence.
I think that was dropped in the chat a little bit ago, so yeah, that's probably
okay.
Yeah. Okay, so David asked, just to confirm that locations marked under negotiations are still eligible for a round 2 application.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, there's another question. Are all capital projects funded project households included in the current mapping tool?
Yes. So since those are finalized, those, if they were eligible in round 1, they've now been moved to the not available bucket, since they're confirmed enforceable commitments.
Okay. All right, next one is from Ben Brown. Can the CBO comment on how much funding is remaining for round 2 after factoring in previously awarded applications plus those that are in negotiation and likely to be rewarded? I don't think we can, but I don't know, Brandy, you want to field that question? Or Allie, Terry, or
I think we should table the answer to that just because the guidance around what we can and cannot say from NTIA is really strict and we don't want to get afoul of it. So sorry for not being able to give you that information right away.
all right, thanks, Allie. Okay, the next question is from Doug. Would you recommend ISPs apply for those VSLs reported under the reliable service flag to ensure they get them in their grant, or should they exclude them and await the CBO's determination? I don't know, Allie, if you're able to field that one too?
And I think what I would say is if it's not included in your application, it's unlikely to be awarded. So if it's something that you want, you should probably include it on your application on the front end. And then if we need to make adjustments, we'll make them on the back end. But include the locations that you want in your application so that we're aware of your interest.
Okay, thanks, Allie. One more, and then we can move on to the portal. And we will take more questions at the end, by the way. So if negotiations are settled / approved for BSLs from round 1, will we be notified that they are removed from round 2? Or are the negotiated locations being compared to round 2 applications? That's from Jamie in the chat. CBO staff, if you need to read that. Will we be notified? I guess they'll show up in the map, right? If they've been removed from round 2, they'll be flagged in the map.
I don't know, Brandy, if you want to weigh in on this. The round 2 map will not be changed during the application window. So it won't be removed from the map partway through the window.
Why don't we take that and respond in the FAQ with that one? So sorry, Jamie, we can't give you a clear answer, but we'll respond in the FAQ. Okay, that seems to be it for the questions for now. So why don't we pass the baton to Allie to talk about the portal. And I think her portion is pretty quick. And then after that, we can get to any final questions.
Yeah, I also wanted to just run through my
Megan.
tips slide real quick. Make sure to review the data and not include any not available locations in your application. Make sure to use the template that we provide. It's available in the link in this slide deck, and once you get into the application portal, you can access it there as well. And you can verify that your CSV uploaded correctly by going to the related tab and re-downloading it to make sure it looks right. And then a final reminder that you need to use version 3.2 of the Fabric. All right, that's all I have. I will hand it to Allie.
Thank you. And so just to wrap up, we wanted to offer a couple of quick reminders about the portal itself, because we know it can be a little bit tricky sometimes. So next slide. Generally, everything in the portal is the same as in round 1. So because you can find detailed information on how to navigate the portal, if you haven't already done it, we'd refer you to the webinars in round 1. We won't go through those details on this call, but we wanted to highlight just a couple of additional updates to remind you, and also remind you of some helpful hints for navigating the portal. So there are a couple of differences in round 2. So the first is, and forgive me, you may have already talked about this, but I wanted to reemphasize it one more time. If you have submitted an application in round 1, you have not been provisionally awarded, and you want to adjust that application, you can do that. You'll submit a new application in round 2. that means that then these two changes that you'll see in the portal would apply to that new application. So if you're cutting and pasting, just remember to adjust these couple of things. So one of those is an updated budget workbook. So there were a couple of calculation errors that we found in our review of last round. And so we've updated the budget workbook. So just remember, when you're going through your budget workbook, go ahead and download the new one. You'll see it as a link on the site, and upload the new one. Secondarily, like Megan talked about, we've got a location upload instead of a project area selection. And so you'll upload those locations in a CSV file. Couple other things to remember about the portal. The portal registration. So this is your sort of very first step. When you get to the registration screen, if you don't have a login, or you want somebody who wasn't submitting applications on your behalf last time to have a login, they need to click on the new member link to set up a login profile. The link to an agency or to a applicant account is your taxpayer ID number. So you gotta have that right when you set up your new member login profile. And then if someone is creating a new login for an existing account, that new user, the request for approval is going to be sent to the primary contact on the account. So that primary contact's just going to want to keep an eye on their email address when that's happening, so they can approve the user and they can move forward. And again, multiple people can be in the portal working on the same application at a time. Just don't forget to save, because you may have your accounting people working on the budget while you've got your network design people working on the network design. So it was designed that way. Next slide. Couple of last minute tips. Just as a reminder, or a heads up for those of you who maybe haven't applied before. Next slide. This is a beast of an application. So even when you're fully prepared with all of the answers, it really does take time just to enter them and to upload all of the documents. So our recommendation is to give yourself a good amount of time just for the data entry for the application. So I know we say this over and over again, but save early and often. There is a save button at the bottom of every page. You do not have to have all of the information in to save for later. But if you enter information into a section and then you switch without saving, the information in that section will not be automatically saved. You actually have to click save at the bottom of the screen for that information to be saved and moved on. And I can say I have done this in testing multiple times. It is incredibly frustrating. So it is my number one tip. A couple of other things. As a reminder, you may want to work outside the portal, right? So if you have narratives, you'll want to have those on a separate screen so that then you can just cut and paste them into the portal, particularly in case you maybe switch between sections and didn't save. At least you don't lose your work. The portal is going to have questions that need to be answered. And it has sort of a simplified version of the question, but the facts documents, the addendum for round 2, the program guidelines, those all offer additional information on what needs to be addressed in the narratives. So you'll want to have both open while you're entering the application. And honestly, when I apply for grants, I typically have the application open on one screen and the program guidelines on the others. I'm drafting my application so that I can reference back to it, additional detail around questions if I need it. Complete your project workbook before the budget, before you complete the budget fields. So the budget workbook, it's referenced in a couple of sections. You can find it in section 9.4. But completing the workbook first before you fill in the budget section will just make the project budget match sections go so much easier. As a reminder, those small changes in the calculation errors, even if you had an old one, go ahead and download the new one for upload, but they're substantively the same. And then Don't forget to complete all of the required fields. I know this feels really self-explanatory, but there are times when an upload is required. It's a required field, but it may not be relevant to you or your project or your agency. So if that's the case, just upload a document that says this upload is not applicable, or even a more descriptive summary about why the upload wouldn't be applicable. But it's still, something does need to be uploaded there. If you try to submit without it, it won't work. And then sort of specific to round 2, if your agency has received clarifying questions from CBO or cure requests, please make sure that those corrections are included in any round 2 applications. We want to make sure that this review is as streamlined as it possibly can be. And so ensuring that if we've asked you for additional documentation, just go ahead and upload it for us so that we can have that as part of your round 2 applications. And then finally, if you're finding that you're not able to click on certifications or you're not able to submit, it's likely because you are not a signature authority. So a signature authority is someone from your agency who is authorized to enter into a contract on behalf of the applying agency, right? So someone who's authorized to sign contracts on behalf of your organization. That's the only person that will be able to certify. So you'll want to save a little bit of time at the end. If multiple people are entering information into a single application, you need to save time at the end for your signature authority to log in, review the information, read all the certifications, affirm them, and then submit at the end. I think those are the last of the tips. I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. I think I saw a couple of things pop into the chat. Oh, Kate, yes. So the program guidelines are not substantively different than in round 1, except that there is now the round 2 addendum. So you'll want to make sure that you read the round 2 addendum and anything that applies to the second round of applications. You'll want to make sure that you're being consistent with the round 2 addendum. And the workbook is a little bit different. And then, of course, the CSV uploads. And then, yes, Mike, you can also open 2 instances of the portal if you need to work between the 2 of them. There's no restriction against that.
And we can take questions about anything too at this time, since that's everything that the broadband office has to present to you. So again, you can raise your hand and ask the question, or you can drop it in the chat. Hi, David, you came off mute. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I did. I was just waiting for somebody else. Yeah, so just to confirm, so you had mentioned, or the team had mentioned that in the event of one of the applications was not selected for preliminary, that we could adjust that application and resubmit. However, if going into the map shows that those locations are gray, can we still submit?
Sorry, I was on mute. Thank you. That's it. That's actually a really great question. I appreciate you saying that. No, you can submit for locations that are marked as eligible on the map.
Yep. Yeah. Appreciate it.
Okay, and there's a question in the chat from Nick. Now that project areas are not relevant, how will CBO deconflict or select between applications that overlap by 1 or more locations?
Thanks for that question. We're going to follow our same process. We'll just be doing it, if you will, sort of conceptually anyway. This is what you can think about it. We'll be doing it on a location basis rather than a project area basis.
And we can probably answer that, or we'll answer everything in the FAQ. But the FAQ will provide more information too as we're able to share it. All right, other questions? Okay. If we do not have any more, and I know sometimes typing takes a minute, so I'll talk slow in case there are more questions. Again, we'll share the slides and the recording afterward. And then we have our advanced email, which I'll drop in the chat here in just a second. If you think of anything else after please send it to the email. And then everything we receive, any question we receive via email on these webinars during office hours, we record and we answer in that FAQ. So we'll make sure you have the link to that FAQ when we send everything out after this call. But if there are not any other questions, I think we can be done. I just dropped the email in the chat for everyone, so. Oh, and Kristen just dropped the FAQ in the chat. Thanks, Kristen. Okay, well, thank you everyone for attending and for your interaction. We appreciate it. Have a great day.